Erica's vignettes about growing up in Greenwich Village in New York City are whimsical and they're sweet. But tonight, she's going out on the fringes where youth courts danger. But it's still sweet and it's very funny. We give you Erica Applespike and the city-owned building.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know I didn't turn my phone off when this phone rang. Everybody knows that. The city-owned building. Most people who die young die of stupidity. Or to put it in a kinder way, they die of poor judgment. When I was a newly minted teenager, I ran with a crowd of other unsupervised young people, many of whom very tragically were to bite the dust before they were 20. It seemed back then it was our job to drive our parents crazy, and their job was to not be driven crazy. At that age, we were like toddlers who, heady with our newly acquired skill of locomotion, would run blindly into danger or anywhere our legs would take us. New York City was a dark and angry place back then, rife with serious drugs, such as amphetamine, which we called speed, cocaine, and heroin, any of which could be bought up in Harlem or on the Lower East Side. Many of my friends were routinely mugged, and some were even stabbed or shot by people trying to obtain money for drugs. I remember my friend, Jimmy Molinari, who was a great drummer. He was dealing cocaine, he explained, to get money to buy his mom's a condo in New Jersey, because she had cleaned houses all her life and had lived from hand to mouth. He was the friend who advised me to do something to help others, so I wouldn't be so tied up in knots worrying about my own problems. Soon after he told me that, he was shot in the head and found dead in a dumpster by the East River. Years later, I remembered and followed his advice, and it shaped my life. Many of the kids I ran with who survived grew up to be law-abiding citizens, some successful artists, musicians, and even Hollywood moguls. Several of us grew up to be psychotherapists, but none of us were dumb enough to work with teenagers. During the year when I was 13, I shared an apartment with a hodgepodge of changing characters. It was a railroad apartment, which meant you had to walk through each of several small rooms to get to the one at the end. There was a bathtub in the kitchen with a cover on it, so it could double as a counter space when it wasn't being used, and a water closet with a toilet tank high up on the wall and a chain you pulled to flush. It was a 5th floor walk-up in a city-owned tenement building. I was brought to live in the apartment by Donna Elliott, a friend I'd met in the village. She was 15 and she told me she'd run away from her Aunt Norma, who had inherited and lived in her sister Edna St. Vincent Millay's mansion in Austerlitz, New York. Donna was an older girl who seemed a born leader because she could instantly make up solutions to problems. This impressed me, even though sometimes they were not very good solutions. I liked her though because she was well read and she liked poetry. Then there was Bartell, a big scary looking black drug dealer. He lived in the apartment with his girlfriend Karen, who was pregnant when they moved in. She was a white girl, young and bubbly. Their union of black and white was not so common in those days, and I observed with some interest that he was extremely gentle with her. I saw my first king-size mattress the day they and several of their friends lugged it up to the 5th floor. It had a tag on it that read, "Western mattress, more room to roam." We all knew where Bartell's drugs were stashed, in case we might have to flush them or throw them out the window in a hurry. He kept his little plasticine bags of speed in a cigar box in the kitchen cupboard. Gypsy was a street person who sifted through garbage looking for special items and occasionally did a set as a stand-up comedian in the coffee shops on MacDougal Street. I met him when I sometimes played guitar and sang folk songs in those places so I could pass a basket to earn some money. I thought he was funny and memorized all his comic bits. One night he told me he had a collapsed lung, so I brought him home to sleep in a bed that was occupied by a fat slovenly girl who was allowed to live with us because she paid the rent. When we put Gypsy in her bed, we told her she had to sleep on the stove, which also had a cover that doubled as a counter.
Wow.
Then when she was asleep, someone put an apple in her mouth to make her look like a suckling pig. She woke up very angry, and packing up her few belongings, she left in a huff. Gypsy left the next night, and we never saw him again. A few days later, Karen, who, because she was pregnant, had sworn off all drugs, got high on the cornflakes with milk and sugar she ate for breakfast. This is how we discovered that before she left, the fat girl had opened Bartell's box and emptied all the little plasticine bags of speed into the sugar bowl. Thinking we'd have to do something about this eventually, we all ate cornflakes with milk and sugar for breakfast and enjoyed ourselves immensely and just let it go. One day, not long after that, Donna decided to renovate the apartment. She started by painting the water closet a shiny chocolate brown. Short and squat, she stood on the toilet seat with a rope tied around her waist to keep her oversized white painter's pants from falling down. She was very industrious and managed to paint the water closet somewhat successfully, with only a little help from Bartell where she couldn't reach. As she inspected her work with pride, she envisioned her next project. She decided to tear down the wall between the two small back rooms to make a nice big room. She got to work a few days later using tools she found on a building site, and she threw herself into this project in earnest with superhuman strength, tearing away at the plaster with crowbar and mallet, dismantling the walls she had chosen brick by brick, until finally there was a very big pile of debris in the middle of the new big room. What to do with the bricks? There was no point in carrying them down 5 flights with no place to get rid of them. So every once in a while, when the spirit moved us, we took to throwing them out the window one at a time into the backyard. The Italian ladies who lived under us and didn't like us anyway liked us less for this. They yelled up every time they heard one go crash. Madonna! Vaffanculo! Fucking beatniks! We thought this was hilarious. Sometimes we'd throw one down really late at night just to shock them. When Bartell came into the new room to inspect Donna's work, he noticed that a loose floorboard squeaked beneath his heavy boot. Concerned that Karen might step on one end and the other end might swing up and hit her in the head, like in the movies, he got a hammer and nail and tried to nail it down. He was a big, powerful man, and he hammered really hard. Suddenly, an enormous gush of water rose up from the floor and began to flood the whole room. Donna reacted instantly by piling bricks on top of the place the water was coming up from. We all followed her lead and covered the area all around with several layers of bricks until we had something resembling the sort of thing you build to have a cookout in the woods. We thought we were good for now, since there was no longer any water filling the room. But the next moment we heard screaming and wailing from below. We laughed as we imagined the Italian ladies running around with umbrellas, clutching their linens and other precious items from the old country and trying to save their furniture from the flood. We realized a pipe had broken, and there was no way for us to turn off the water since the building was city-owned and the basement was kept padlocked. A lady named Nora lived on the second floor, and she didn't hate us too much. As the gushing water had also reached her apartment, she'd already called the police to come and turn it off. When 2 beat cops arrived, Nora told them the water was coming from our apartment, so they came up to us to size up the situation. Bartell, wisely, stayed in a room so the cops would think that only 3 little girls were living there. This turned out to be a good idea, since they were undoubtedly much friendlier to us than they might have been if they knew we had a big black drug dealer for a roommate. The older cop, definitely more experienced, went down to the basement to turn off the water, while the younger one stayed in our apartment and reported on his burping walkie-talkie to his partner when the water stopped running. When the older cop came back upstairs, he asked us what had happened, and we explained about the loose floorboard, leaving out Bartell, how we just tried to nail it down because we thought it might be dangerous. He accepted this explanation, and the 2 of them turned to go. It was at this point that Karen, who I guess meant well but was not really too bright, cheerfully offered them coffee. Busy little domestic housewife style, she served them in 2 mismatched but clean mugs. She had a small plate with a few Oreos on it and a carton of milk, and she placed the sugar bowl right next to these. The table looked very nice and balanced. It took a moment for us to realize what was happening, and alarmed, our eyes darted back and forth from the table and between us. But at this point, we all knew it might look suspicious to snatch the sugar bowl back up. So we just let it be. Both cops took milk and sugar. The older one commented on how good the coffee was. They each had a second steaming cup with more milk and lots of sugar. Soon they were no longer in a hurry and seemed grateful to be drinking delicious hot coffee before going back to the cold, windy streets. As the time ticked away, we watched with fascination as the 2 of them, who had seemed relative strangers when they first arrived, became good friends. The younger one, who had been very quiet, became quite animated. He talked a blue streak, going faster and faster as he excitedly hatched a plan to take his girlfriend to Coney Island next summer and propose to her on the roller coaster. The older cop eagerly shared all kinds of funny anecdotes about his wife and kids and interesting stories from his years walking the beat. Finally, their eyes sparkling, playfully poking each other in the ribs and slapping each other on the back, they linked their arms and left. We heard wild laughter echoing in the hallway as they descended the stairs. We waited for days for them to come back and arrest us. They never did.
We'll take a short break. Thank you.